Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Westworld, Season 2, Episode 4, The Riddle of the Sphinx. And what an episode this was. A lot of people are saying that this is the best episode of the series, and I am inclined to agree because I called it. This is the episode that proves my fan theory right, so I'm just gonna hang my hat on this one and say that's the good one. This is the good one. I predicted this back in episode 2, or maybe episode 1, whenever Daddy Delos sort of first showed up, and we got this hint of this guy as someone who was very concerned with the now, and the fact that he would not continue to be around to run his business. I said, what does a man like that do with the power to build a human-like robot? He builds himself. He builds a copy of himself so that he can live on immortal. And we get, now we don't get the confirmation here in this first scene, but the wheels were already spinning immediately when I saw him pour the drink and not make it. All right, we get a kind of panning shot of the room. It's a real nice room. Apparently they burn it every time they fail, which seems like a waste of a nice little hourglass and cool weird pedal thingy, but I mean, they've got more money than God, so I guess it's fine. But he's in here pouring himself some tea, and he shakes as he's pouring it, and you might attribute that to the illness, whatever it is that's taking him, if you think, if you were inclined to think that he was alive in this scene. But then he continues pouring off of the cup, and that was a clear callback for me to the scene in season 1 where Ford takes, I forget what's her name, but the lady who's threatening to shut him down, takes her to the sort of villa where she had stayed as a little girl, and shows her that he's gonna tear it all up and make his new narrative. And in that scene, the guy had trouble pouring, right? And we have another echo of that in this episode where there's the bartender who has trouble pouring. And so this is sort of a little flag they like to throw in there for people who are watching closely, that maybe somebody's a robot. And I when I was writing this down, I couldn't help but think that maybe, in my mind, Jonathan Nolan heard the way that the word pour and the word poor, as in P-O-O-R, are the same, and he was like, pours poorly. Seems like a good thing to... that's just sort of off the crazy section of my brain. A lot of times when I'm taking notes for these, I'll just think about words and how they're connected to other words, and maybe Jonathan Nolan doesn't do that, but I like to think as a writer he's probably thought about those kind of things. But the upshot of this scene is William shows up as a young William, right, in this episode, for at least a couple of these iterations, and he not reads exactly, but he performs this script with Daddy Delos. And Daddy Delos, says to him, it seems pretty far-fetched that you're going to just have this same conversation with me when I come back, and then starts to... Well, he doesn't start to glitch out in this scene. We know that he will start to glitch out shortly based on future experience, but he gets handed a piece of paper, and again, we don't see it in this scene, but my brain was already like, okay, yep, they have written down all the stuff they've just said. That's how it goes, which is an interesting question. They're trying to recreate this man, right? They're trying to recreate a human consciousness, to take a human brain and put it in a robot, and yet their measure for that is, does it do the same thing every single time? For people that create scripted interactions for robots, for their measure of humanity to be, it follows the scripted interaction exactly, seems kind of off. Maybe you wouldn't want him to do the same thing every time just because that's what he did the first time. I would like to think that if I had the same conversation 5 different times, I might go off on some different rabbit trails sometimes. Maybe not. I know that sometimes my brain is on some weird rails, but it seems like an odd criteria for them to measure by, because it's exactly the same criteria that they use to measure the robots by, and they know they programmed them. They know they set them up, so why not just program this guy to be what they want? I don't know. Speaking of tracks, though, the next scene is very short, but it's the man in black walking past these guys laying train tracks, and their programming has clearly gone off somewhere, because rather than using railroad ties, they're laying these tracks over the bodies of what I assume are guests. All right? And there's an interesting visual metaphor here about progress at any cost, of progress, just steamrolling over the bodies of the innocent. Debatable whether everybody who's a guest is innocent, but most of these people just came to have fun, and I don't know that they deserve to have this end to be made part of these train tracks by these malfunctioning robots. And the man in black and Lawrence, ride off towards Lawrence's hometown. In the meantime, I say in the meantime, and we should discuss towards the end the wrenches that are thrown in our current understanding of the timeline. But just the next thing that happens that we see, let's say, is the zombie girl, whose name I've forgotten right off the top of my head, but she's dragging Bernard through the desert and drops him off right outside this cave and leaves, I assume to go back to the rest of the plot. And he goes there to meet up with Elsie. She be alive! A lot of fan theories about this, that she was still alive somewhere, which were on point. Many of those fan theories, I'd like to point out, had Elsie in control of the Ghost Nation, which is not accurate. Elsie has been tied up this whole time, and this whole time is probably less than a week. Okay? She says that she was given some protein bars in a bucket, and we see the number of protein bars she had, and it's not a giant pile, it's like maybe 10. So she hasn't been here for a long time. But Bernard comes in and breaks her loose, and he starts to break down. He has his cognitive lock. She finds out as he sort of shows her that he's an android, and she processes it pretty quickly. Like, she runs through, wait, okay, you would leave, you had a wife and a kid, oh, right, okay, yeah, we can actually write those in, can't we? That makes sense. She puts it all together, which is nice, because if you have a character in the situation not able to process something that we, the audience, already have put together, it leads to kind of a disconnect. Even if it makes sense for that character, you're going to have people in the audience yelling at them, how come you can't figure this out? Everybody already knows this. All right, so it was good to have her figure this out relatively quickly, and it also points to Elsie being a pretty sharp cookie. Or mixing my metaphors there, but you know what I'm saying. And she tries to help out Bernard. He's in cognitive lock, and she says, listen, even if I wanted to help you, implication that she doesn't really, which is understandable, way out from anywhere that's sort of, of access to underground, so I won't be able to get any of the fluid that you need. What am I supposed to do? And Bernard has something that he says to her before he, reveals that there's this underground lab and sees himself. He says, is this now? And we get this understanding that any scene that we experience with Bernard, we can't trust the timeline. We can't trust sequentialism for Bernard's scenes. He may not be able to understand one thing happening after another. Now, to be fair, as an audience member, to see him dragged off by Zombie Girl in the previous episode and then see him dragged on the screen by Zombie Girl in this episode, you could say that he got away and did something else and then came back and she caught him again. That seems like a bit of a stretch. I mean, just by the measure of Occam's razor, despite what, Robert Ford said in the first season, I'm going to go with that, at least for now, this is directly after that battle or close enough. But we need to be, sort of sharp-eyed waiting for anything that might seem off about where Bernard's timeline is, because he doesn't know. He's hallucinating. He doesn't understand sequentialism anymore. And he's, just falling apart. Now, they get down into the secret lab, which we've already seen in the first episode with Bernard and the CEO lady, whose name I've forgotten at the moment. But it seems like the same lab. And here, Elsie starts putting stuff together. And she starts freaking out. There's the Slender Man guy who she kills, one of these weird sort of undifferentiated like robot things that they've printed, essentially what you see printed in the intro. And she freaks out about him. And she asks Bernard, is Ford in control of you now? To which Bernard replies, Ford's dead. Now, as audience members, we know that that's not technically an answer to the question. I don't know why. I mean, we see later that Bernard's completely able to lie to her anyway if he wants to. But in a sense, this almost feels like an evasion. Because the fact that Ford's dead does not change the fact that Ford is still very much controlling some things in the park. That some things are still very much puppets on his strings, and or at least seem to be, right? Depending on timeline stuff, we'll figure out what's going on with the Man in Black and his game that he's playing and how sequential that is with everything else. But we'll get into that toward the end of the episode. We get another sort of flashback to the Ghost Nation and the India girl, whose name I don't believe we've learned yet. She sort of gets some info about what's going on from the security guard, who I haven't seen a lot of this season. He's like, they don't seem to be killing the guests for whatever reason. And she says, yeah, screw that. I'm still running away the second that I can. The next scene is the Man in Black and Lawrence. And they come home, and it seems like the town is empty, and they run into what seems like what is left of the remaining Confederados after the fort fight. Now, I know that I just said that what we have here is, you know, if we have a direct line from the previous episode to this episode, we shouldn't jump to too many conclusions. Maybe take the simplest answer. However, in this instance, my brain wants to go off the tracks a little bit and say maybe these guys have been here for longer than we think. Or maybe that they've been reset in their path for longer than we think. Because it's possible, and we've brought this up in the past as well, that the Man in Black is a robot. And what this episode does is it introduces some possibilities. What it really does is it gives Jonathan Nolan a tool to screw us with, okay? It gives him another way to, you know, make us think things are one way when they are in fact another way. What the tool that he had last season was the timeline and the fact that the hosts don't age, and he still has that in his belt, but now he also has the tool of humans that can also be robots, that people that were human at one point can be some kind of robot now. And I think that is an interesting development, and one of the candidates for someone who could have been human at one point and now be a robot is the Man in Black. And if you'll recall, in episode 1, when he woke up from that gunfight, I said, man, that is convenient that he managed to survive that. Now I'm wondering if it's super convenient. Like, what if that is his sort of the beginning of his loop, and the game that he's playing is Ford trying to, or someone trying to bring this robot version of the Man in Black to full self-actualization, the copy of his consciousness, to bring it up to speed. This is all speculation, okay? And there's other candidates for people who could be human/robot things, but this is a fun one, and we don't have any indication yet. This is the first time when the Man in Black has really crossed paths with what we would call the main storyline, and I'm just pointing out the fact that the Confederados are here doesn't mean they just got here. They could have been here for a while, or they could have been reset by somebody. Again, just theory. I don't know if that's the fact, but we'll have to keep an eagle eye out for this. We get another scene with Daddy Delos, and we get the full culmination of what happens here and what's going on, because this is a different version. All right, he has the same conversation, but you can tell there's some differences in the routine a little bit and how he wakes up. And William comes in, doesn't work out, starts to stutter, and he gets terminated. And by terminated, I mean, like, burned. Again, I don't know why you can't just, like, just keep the room, guys. I know you've got money to literally burn, I guess, but it seems like you could just reset with the different robot, but the same room, and if you didn't incinerate everything. Maybe that's why everything's glass. Maybe it just survives the burning. That's, for all I know. It seems like a little bit excessive, but it's a cool visual, so we'll cut it some slack. Continuing on with the Man in Black, he gets held up by the Confederados, as we said. There's the unsteady bartender, and they do something here that I have a bit of a problem with. They establish this bartender guy has got a shaky hand. They have the nitro, right? These bottles of nitro, which were established in season 1 as this plot point for one of these, narratives. And they give the nitro to this guy, which, when they shoot, blows his hand off. And the implication here is that they have literally left bottles of nitroglycerin around the park for just anybody to find and do whatever with. It contradicts something that we saw in season 1, right? When in season 1, the Man in Black is doing his jailbreak, and it's just a real quick flash, but the guys in the control panel say, we gotta request for a pyrotechnics. All right, they want, there's going to be an explosion, and if you're running a park, you don't want to blow your guests up, so you do, in fact, keep tight control on what can blow up and what can't, just like you keep control of your guns. And yet here, the way this works, this nitroglycerin explodes when it's shot. And I don't think it's because there's like some explosive round in this guy's arm. And it happens later on when he has him drink it and Lawrence shoots him. It literally explodes. And we can either explain this by saying, again, that the Man in Black is on a very carefully planned arc and a narrative that either he's not actually human and they're not concerned with blowing him up, and this is just, it looks like the nitro from before, but it functions differently, or we can say that it's a little bit sloppy writing. You make the choice. I will find out. But it adds into some of the questions of how the park works. And speaking of questions about how the park works, one of the things that we see in this episode that I can't remember seeing before is rain. The Man in Black is in this bar, right? He's decided to make a deal with the Confederados. He tells them where the weapons are. It seems like he double-crossed Lawrence. And in this moment where sort of the Confederados are going wild and threatening Lawrence's wife and kid, there's rain outside for the Man in Black's narrative or game or whatever. And I assume, and I have to assume, that the way rain works in Westworld is the way it works everywhere else. Because I don't think you could have just a giant dome over everything. And we haven't seen it rain. I cannot remember having seen it rain in Westworld in previous seasons. So I guess you just have weather happen like it happens, which again kind of clashes with like the sort of ultra control that they have here. I don't know how that works out, and if Michael Crichton was writing on this show, I bet that they would make use of this sort of inherent chaos of having weather systems interact with this very, very orderly park, but that doesn't seem to be a direction we're going with the writers we have right now. The interesting thing here for me is that we've got the Man in Black. We know his backstory is that his wife killed herself and that his daughter hates him for it. And, he has this very complicated relationship with his family, but they clearly matter to him on some level. And he's triggered by this maltreatment by the Confederados of these robot village people. Not like the village people, just the villagers, all right, not the group. But he can't bear to see what they're doing to these things. And I don't think the Man in Black believes that these things are sentient. which makes his actions kind of interesting because really what he's doing here is he's playing into a script. If I'm Ford and I'm trying to manipulate the Man in Black, I manipulate him to go to Lawrence's hometown. I know that he has a bond with Lawrence. I know that the Man in Black has daughter issues and wife issues. And so you have this bond of these two guys that have a wife and daughter that care about them and they care about, but that they also can't connect with. And then you push the button of, and now this other guy is going to have his family killed in front of him, just like you lost your wife. It's all very obvious, really. Like these are the buttons you push if you want the Man in Black to do something for you, and he just waltzes right over to that tune. If Ford is in control of all this, whether or not the Man in Black is a robot or not, he's still proving that the Man in Black can be scripted as tightly as any robot could, because this is completely predictable that he would fall for this. It's nice to see that he has a heart, but on the other hand, he's really letting his buttons be pushed. And again, he doesn't believe that these people are people. Like, he's perfectly happy with killing, these robots. And I don't think it's, maybe he would be perfectly fine with killing people anyway. But it seems like he's still managed to disconnect these guys from humanity. But here, the narrative gets to him. The narrative breaks through. And I guess that says something about storytelling in general, in the way that you can watch a movie, right? You can be watching a movie and you can know these are paid actors. They are in front of a camera that, many hundreds of people are right behind or close to behind. There's a set that they're on. All of this stuff has been very carefully staged. Like, in your cognitive brain, you can know that and still be emotionally affected by what's happening on screen. And it's a fascinating function of human beings and a function of art that we can separate. Like, in some deep cognitive place, we know, Star Wars is not real, but yet, and we can watch something again and again and again, right? I can listen to a piece of music or watch an actor go through a scene or whatever and feel the same things over and over again, which is maybe sort of a fun nod to these ideas that these guys are in this loop constantly and playing these storylines out over and over and over again, that they still maintain their impact at least for the human brain, despite the fact that you may have been through them already. The Man in Black, obviously, like I said, saves the day. He goes off into the sunset riding with his new posse from the men in town. Again, sort of a really obvious, do the narrative thing and get your posse anyway, make your choice, but you'll still get to go forward either way. Whether or not he killed the Confederados, the Man in Black was going to glory, and he rides off into the sunset where he meets his daughter. Yes. Although I got ahead of myself. I'm looking at my notes here, and I note that Man in Black talks to this other presence that it has been taking over robots around him, taking over children most often, and Lawrence's little girl talks to him in the voice of the game designer and says, if you're looking forward, you're looking in the wrong direction. Which is just also there was a guy off screen waving a sign saying, timeline stuff happening, you guys, watch for some timeline stuff. So the idea that we are still seeing some timeline weirdness, there's a very real possibility that everything that the Man in Black is experiencing is happening much later than these other events that we're seeing in the park. And I think, here's where I'm coming from on this. We've been assuming this whole time that it's Ford that set up the Man in Black's game. All right? Because we've had the people communicating through the robots to him. They've got the sort of voice modulator. Some of the voices sounded a little bit like Ford. And the Man in Black is on this journey, right, to glory. Whether or not, well, let's assume that he's a robot. Okay, let's assume that this is taking place in the future, that this is a recreation of the Man in Black that's finally kind of sort of working, and he's following this script and this game that's been set up for him. I think a good candidate for who's actually designed this game is not Ford, but Bernard, or possibly Arnold. Now, I know Arnold's dead, but the brain, if you recall, so one of the, Bernard and Elsie are down in the bottom, right, in the underworld. They find the degraded Delos unit, who I guess we were sort of caught up to present day because he gets a visit from the Man in Black, and the Man in Black just talks to him about, what has gone on in the world when he was missing. The interesting thing, by the way, about all of these visits and the Delos robot, or the Delos robot breaking down, is that he seems fine until William visits him. When William visits him, that's when everything starts to go haywire. And I think specifically when he realizes that he's not real, when he gets a whiff of the idea that he could be an artificial consciousness, he starts to freeze up. He starts to choke. He starts to, not be able to emote properly. And I don't know, why they keep doing it this way. It seems like maybe you shouldn't, try not telling him he's a robot. Just let him out into, a regular society and see how he functions there. But they keep doing the same thing over and over, and, who am I? I'm not the one building a person robot, so I don't know. But Bernard is down in the facility with Elsie. They find her, and he at some point in his memory, he is taking this cortical implant thing, the brain of one of these robots that Ford had sent him to get. And there's a lot of speculation about whose implant it is. The obvious one is Ford, right? That's sort of where your brain immediately goes to, is Ford's going to revive himself, and he's going to be back in season 3 as a robot thing. I think that's wrong, A, because it's the obvious answer, and B, because Anthony Hopkins is probably expensive. And if you can, A, get out of paying Anthony Hopkins more money, and B, get a twist out of it where the people weren't expecting, I think that as a showrunner, you go for that. So the front runners for me, in my mind, are that it's Arnold, some version of Arnold's brain to be brought back, or that it's the Man in Black. If it's Arnold in this timeline, I still think there's room for the human robot Arnold to have reproduced the Man in Black's mind and put him in the scenario that he wants him in and run him through. Because what was Arnold all about? Arnold was always about these robots achieving self-actualization. The idea that they could ascend to full consciousness. If Arnold was helping at any point with this Delos program where they're trying to bring back a person, and I don't know how he would feel about it 100%, but I think he would definitely want to show that it could be done, that consciousness could exist inside of one of these robot bodies. And if he's responsible for this, it makes sense that he would be trying to bring out this latent consciousness in the robotic Man in Black, and have him know that he's a robot, and at the same time be able to act with free will. But I don't know that that's going to succeed, because as we've seen so far, the Man in Black is completely on a rail here, it seems like. And the other thing the one thing that throws a wrench into that theory for me is that the daughter shows up. I don't know if she would play the part of, in this imagined scenario, of William showing up and kind of running through the script with Delos, or if I'm just completely off base and he's in present time and there's no weirdness going on whatsoever. But that's a whole different, that's a whole can of worms, and we're just gonna have to keep watching, because there's still a lot of season 2 left. We're only in episode 4, and we're getting all these giant reveals. And as we also got the reveal, I almost skipped over it, that Bernard just straight up killed some fools in the lab because he has a flashback to killing them. And then Elsie asks him if she can trust him, and he's like, yeah, sure, you can trust me. It's like, clearly not, but okay, Elsie. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what Bernard's end game is here. What he's trying to accomplish in having these guys killed. Who's in control of him at this point? Is it still Ford? Is it somebody else? Does he have his own programming that he's running off of and he's just cool with the murder now? A lot of open questions that I do not have the answers to, but I'm enjoying thinking about them. I hope you guys are too. If you have ideas or other theories or further thoughts on something that I've said, love for you to drop them in the comments. I try to reply to all of them relatively quickly, within a day or two. And I appreciate all of them immensely. You guys have helped me, sort of pointed me towards some things that I was not aware of. The theory that, what's-her-face was the daughter. I don't even know if we know her name yet, but the idea that she was maybe related to Ford, I still think that that's just kind of like, I said in the comments to the person who said that, it's like, it could be, but I don't know what purpose it serves, and I still don't know what narrative purpose it serves, but I think there is potential there for him to be working through his issues. There's dramatic potential there because of the baggage that exists between them. So I'm not down on that plot point, but I was not like the biggest fan of it before it was revealed. And now that it has been revealed, we'll see how it goes. I will see you guys next week with another episode of the Westworld recap. Y'all take care.